Yeah.
progressing again.
Thanks.
And I don't know the situation with, the kids and COVID. It might be that, I know some people, for instance, have concern about kids growing up in a world with, masks and everything, that just generates a sense of anxiety and lack of safety for kids that's also harmful in its own way, and trying to juggle it all. I was reading something today about somebody talking about their adolescent daughter, and somebody else said having your kids enter puberty at the time of COVID is one of the worst things in the world. And I could see why. I mean, just, the isolation, the confusion, the sense of fear, what's a realistic danger versus, in conflated danger. All of those things just make it really hard. And I think we're still in
Oh, yeah. He was in nursery school, which got interrupted during those 2 years, which was terrible for him socially. Terrible.
Yeah. So some people feel that that's, there's risks or pain or danger in that way too, and that actually having some sense of safety in the world. But whether that's the best way to do it or not, I'm not saying. I'm just thinking that there are reasons why somebody might have done what they did that makes some sense. Whether it's the best choice or not, it's another story. But it's not.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell.
The blue. It's really hard to tell.
Yeah. So I just kept my mouth shut. Didn't want to, but I'm afraid that was coming from not wanting to offend them and kind of ingratiating, rather than what might have been in their best interest. But I couldn't tell, so.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, yeah.
I think Mika had something. Except you gotta unmute, dude.
Who? Me?
No, Mika had his hand raised, and then Mark, I think. Oh, and Kim.
I don't know. Mika, you're muted. There you
Now, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I had done that. Okay, so usually stuck with the worry that what I'm saying is obvious, but what I've been working on a lot lately is trying to find out where the I is, where my own agenda is, or where my ego is stepping into the ballpark. And when I can stop and look at it, I try and ask, who's asking this information, and who wants to find it out? And like in a situation like that, if I could think of it, I would say, is what's going on here that I want somebody to listen to me, or that I want them to understand my view of the situation? And that gets right in the way of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And when I step back, I can say, all right, or do I want to just know, do I want to just make sure that some awareness is happening? And it doesn't have to be an awareness directed at my own line of thinking, or it doesn't have to be the awareness that I'm the one that's handing it to them, whoever it is. And I'm finding that a lot of times solves for me whether I'm going to speak up or not. If I can't find a way to do it that isn't my saying this is what I want, then I just keep quiet. And that sometimes answers a question for me about whether I should be imparting wisdom or my view or not. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
Okay. So 2 people with hands up. Kim, or Kim's iPhone, and then Mark.
Could you just review that story again about the woman who was extremely anxious and then screwed up the courage to go ahead and ask a question, and Rinpoche's response of that's the stupidest question I've ever heard, and
Yeah,
how that
again,
was skillful or transformative for her?
I think it was, yeah, and again, I'm paraphrasing what I remember in the story. I think what it was is it was a way, it was part of it, I think, was in, tone of voice and his manner. So I don't think, even though that's what he said, I don't think it was said in the sense of like a sharp cutting critical tone at all. But again, I wasn't there, but it was also like, here's your worst fear, and it pops.
Right.
Now, different person, different situation, that could go horribly badly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just I think an example of, on the one hand, it might seem on one level to be one of the most unkind things you could say to this person.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly under other circumstances, it would certainly be just that unkind. But in this case, it cut through something. It seemed to cut through something. I had a different but similar example of one I did see where, again, a person asked an extremely convoluted question, very anxious about how they were behaving, what they were doing in the shrine room, in the hallway, here, there. And it was like, it seemed like it took like a couple of minutes at least just to say the question. Long pause. And then Trungpa Rinpoche says, "Could you say that again?" And there was no way in the world it could be repeated. No way in the world. And again, the response was just a sudden like laughter and just a complete letting go of the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think, it's just that point that can also demonstrate sense of humor as well, which also can work very badly if it's, taken as mocking. But it clearly wasn't. That's not how it was heard. That's not how it was meant.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that it's also not from an ego point of view, reinforcing some sense of, oh, you're so weak or you're so unable or whatever, let me take care of you. It totally cuts through all of that.
Okay, that makes sense. The second anecdote especially. Thank you.
Mark?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I just in the book, I use the audio book, and they talk in the end, the question and answer, which you went over with the generosity. Are you coming from a place of generosity, or are you coming from a place of hostility? And he answers it that you can't tell the difference with a question you can ask yourself. But I thought what it was. Do you remember?
You're breaking up a little. I'm having a hard time hearing. I didn't hear what you said
Oh,
exactly.
sorry. Can you hear me better? Being closer?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just at the end of the question and answer, they're talking, how do you know that you're coming from the right place? This is what everybody's discussing. And are you coming from hostility, or are you coming from a place of, just being open? And he says you can ask yourself a question that'll kind of help you know where you're coming from, because it's very hard to tell the difference. I think that's what I remember. Is that correct?
I'm looking right now.
Sorry, I have the audio book, so I can't go through it.
Well, that's what Mika said.
Okay.
I didn't quite catch Mika's point. It sounds important. I missed it. Could someone sum it up for me? Or Micah?
I could respond if
Yeah.
you want.
Yeah. I'm sorry I missed it. I didn't catch it.
Well,
But it sounds important.
do I raise my hand to get called on? What? All right. So I was just saying something that's really occupying me a lot lately. And that's trying to see when I can remember to do this, of course, because we're governed by knee-jerk reactions. But when I can see to do it, is to try and see where my agenda is coming into play. even if it's a good agenda in my mind. In other words, where is the I? Where am I actually? What's happening here? Am I actually just in response? Or do I have an I? I want somebody to listen to me. I want somebody to hear what I'm saying. I want somebody to be influenced by my view. I want somebody to realize the rationality of what I'm presenting as opposed to whatever they're into it. And that when I see that happening, which is really all the time, when I see that happening, to just step back from it. And if I can't find a way to communication where I don't see the I as being central, I don't want to make it. I just want to let it go and let space happen. And I want to occupy that space when I can honestly feel when I can honestly feel that I'm not taking control of it for some purpose, even if the purpose is great. Still, it's my purpose, and I don't want to be doing that. And so she was sort of asking, how do I know when to step in or what to say? And I was sort of saying, well, if you can see where you are central, where the ego is talking, let that go and see if there's another way that you can communicate. And sometimes it's just asking, sometimes it's just wondering out loud. As long as there's some way where you can feel that again, you're not saying, look at me, look at what I'm saying. Because that's a I think that's a little worse than a blind alley. I think it can actually be destructive with the best intentions in the world. And this is also what I found in therapy. My biggest problem as a therapist was getting out of the way. And when I could do that successfully, I would have a much better interaction. Better is a funny word. Have a much more interaction. Okay, so I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's clear now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think maybe I'm just looking at the questions and answers. So the last question was, perhaps a person can grow into a certain kind of openness, compassion with regard to other people, but then he finds that even this compassion is still limited, still a pattern. Do we always have to rely on our openness to carry us through? Is there any way to make sure we're not fooling ourselves? And the answer is, this is very simple. If we fool ourselves at the beginning, there will be some kind of agreement that we automatically make with ourselves. Surely everyone has experienced this. For instance, if we're speaking to someone and exaggerating our story, before we even open our mouths, we will say to ourselves, I know I'm exaggerating, but I'd like to convince this person. We play this little game all the time. So it's a question of really getting down to the nitty-gritty of being honest and fully open with ourselves. Openness to other people is not the issue. The more we open to ourselves completely and fully, then that much more openness radiates to others. We really know when we're fooling ourselves, but we try to play deaf and dumb to our own self-deception.
Thank you.
Sorry, it took me a while, but
That's great. I'm so glad you read that because I have this old used copy. It's literally, it says $4.95 on it. So it must have when it first came out, and it happens to be missing the last 1 or 2 pages of the question and answer section. So that was great. It's inspiring me to get a new book.
yeah, this is actually fairly new because I've had my other ones fall apart over the years from reading and rereading. But I think actually that's an important point, that if we're not open to ourselves first, it's impossible to be really open to other people.
Oh,
And I think he's right that we recognize when we have a little bit of an agenda going, something that we're trying to make happen. True.
Yeah, just the idea of ruthless compassion, and does it apply to oneself? And if it does, are there examples of it? I get the example of the mother with a child trying to cross a street, but I'm just curious if it's applicable in how one deals with oneself.
What do people think?
I think, yes, you got to be generous with yourself first, I think, and then you can open up and be more open for others, I think. Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to envision what it looks like or how to describe it. You know, instances. Yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there.
Well, it's a great question. I think it, partly relates to how open and honest we are with ourselves, just like he says, and how, as we study and practice, our view of what we're doing with our lives changes. So that, what I was thinking of actually in response to your question is Punlap Rinpoche talking about renunciation, which ordinarily we think of in the sense of denying ourselves in some way, actually says that if we really understand the nature of our existence in terms of ego and suffering, that actually renunciation is kindness to ourselves. And that the fact that we don't see it that way, either we're misunderstanding renunciation or we're misunderstanding what it is to be trapped in ego. So I think in that sense, we could be, not in the sense of aggression, but in the sense of clarity, be ruthlessly compassionate to ourselves too. It's just that often it's not that. It's, there's a notion of punishing ourselves and wanting to make a better ego. And, people go through cycles of, self-punishment and then indulgence, and that doesn't lead us anywhere. That's just more going in circles.
Thank you.
Something's wrong with your sound.
Oh, John, I had to mute you because the audio is really messed up.
All right, Miriam?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. This point around fearless compassion towards oneself and what does it look like? I've been struggling with that a lot. And the best that I could achieve is being neutral, like noticing, let's say, irritation or something in me that's a little more destructive, and then noticing and allowing it and waiting for it to subside. And I'm finding it hard to think of, like, with other people is much easier. I do that for a living. It's easy to go, and really feel their pain and go with, the suffering that they're experiencing. But that doesn't seem to be so easy to do towards oneself. And I'm just wondering, if I just went, it was a hard day, or you never get a break, or I'm not sure. It doesn't feel that helpful. It seems like the best thing in handling ourselves and a lot of our problems with people is our reactions, and either not accepting them or acting on them or whatever, creating more chaos. It seems like if we can just let it go, and I think that's the whole point of moving forward on this path, is you start to not have such sharp boundaries, and so you can let those experiences where you would normally react towards yourself and let them, it's like it's keeping a calm interior somehow. Maybe that's how I would refer to fearless compassion. And it might be fearless because sometimes there's things we don't want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes courage. Yeah. So anyway, that's all I want. If somebody succeeds in other ways, please share.
Okay. Actually, I think being neutral is pretty good all by itself, because so often we notice something and then we want to do something about it. And in a lot of times it's actually the noticing, not what we do with it. It's the noticing that's most important. But we jump, we want to do something. So actually being neutral is pretty good, I think. Dan?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that Trip's question and others is a great question too. But the thing, I think this can probably be said about any day, but it really hit home with me today, and just I was just treated in a very dismissive way by the director of the facility that I go to sometimes work at, and so I went through a whole thing about it, and wound up calling Karen, my wife, about it, because I know she just loves to talk about how awful other people are. And that's what I needed to do at the time, but it wasn't really, I mean, it was helpful in a venting kind of way, but that never does anything for too long. But ruthless compassion for me, I think, and I was thinking about this today, and I've also heard people talk about it as fierce compassion. I think it's the same thing. But for me, let's take a difficult interaction, which I had today. For me, it takes the form of only ruthless compassion for myself, only looking at what I can do to change the situation, or to change my experience of the situation, and if I can't, if there's nothing I can do, regardless of the other person, doesn't matter, how whatever the other person was being, then there's nothing I can do about it. The only thing I can do is change my experience, change the way I look at it, which is basically about not taking it personally and not taking it as a blow to my ego, which it isn't ultimately. And to me, that's the ruthless compassion, the fierce compassion. Just saying, I can only change my experience of this because that's up to me. It's up to me if I want to get insulted. It's up to me if I want to turn this into a power play, which I could easily do. And it's up to me if I want to go that direction and find some stupid satisfaction out of winning this. And that's ruthless compassion, is not doing that, not engaging in that totally unproductive way of dealing with it, no matter how good it might feel at the time, because anger is pretty addictive too. So thanks, Trip, and everyone else.
I have a response to that. It just brings up for me the way that I felt today and tonight, because I think everyone's waiting to hear what the election results are. And I don't know if I'm going to be giving people, some of my friends and family, a lot of compassion, or if I'm going to be receiving a lot of compassion. And I don't really want to be on the receiving end of it, but it's just it's a really uncomfortable place to be, because the country's in such a, tomorrow we're going to kind of know the new direction of the country, I guess, or at least in the next few days. So I don't really have a question, just a comment about being in that place of not knowing what's coming and feeling very vulnerable about that.
If I can. Oh, I'm sorry, Jane has her hand up.
Thank you. You know, the more we get to the end of this book, I think that the whole level of our conversations is very different from what they were earlier. But I want to go way back to Valerie's question and Judy's question, because I think there's something unique in the parent-child relationship, especially when you're talking about adult children, and how we have to let go of ourselves first, because we see ourselves in our children. And when there's, you know, criticism or judgment, it's not only of them, but of us, and maybe the way we brought them up, or who and what they are maybe is disappointing or not what we would have hoped for. So it's very difficult to let go of all of that. And I don't think that's so much ego. I think it's care and love and true, maybe radical, ruthless compassion toward our children. So we want them to be happy. We want them to be successful. We want all these things for them. And we then in the process, as I heard in Valerie and in Judy's question, of questioning, well, how do we do that? Because we've developed through, I mean, I have two daughters in their 40s. They're very different people and have very different lives. And I've had to really work very hard on not giving them any advice. It's very hard because you think, well, you've gone through this and you know a lot, and you could, you know, share that with them. And really resonated when you talked about the COVID and your grandchild having had it. My whole family, including the kids, have had it at least twice. And that's because they lived their lives and made decisions about not letting COVID rule their lives. And now we know that the more you've had COVID, the chances are they have more antibodies than folks who have not had it, or children. So there's no one answer, except I think this, if you want to call it unconditional or ruthless acceptance or radical acceptance, not of yourself, of others. And it's much harder of having that ruthless acceptance of our children.
Yeah.
So could I just thinking about Meg and your concern about the political situation. Here I sit in the fine state of Georgia.
Wow.
And yeah. And the thing that comes to mind for me is, and God, I hope I don't misquote the Lojong slogan in post-meditation, be a child of illusion, right? And the idea that we jam up, you know, I share the same concerns, and we jam up so much energy into things that we can't control. And I think the only thing that I can possibly do with the state of Georgia right now is remind myself that everything is workable. And that's the only way I'm actually going to get through the night in the next several weeks, is that everything is workable. Most of the candidates that I would like to have win, that I think protect my daughter's rights and generally the rights of people in the state, probably aren't going to win. And it's not like all or nothing. And so I would just add, I would just throw that out, that everything's workable. And I think we put ourselves into a corner. I know I put myself into a corner when I think about politics. It gets my blood pressure going. And I think that's unnecessary. There's just more work to do, obviously, and a considerable amount of work. But yeah, that slogan came in handy as I drove away from the voting poll this morning and had to shake my head.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, difficult. but everything's workable. I think that is a valid statement.
I'll give it a try.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We'll report back.
Jane, something in what you said reminded me of Fred Rogers and his thing about, do you remember what it was like to be a child?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times we, especially if we're working with kids or dealing with kids, forget that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. It's true.
Anyway. Well,
I mean, I think Fred Rogers was a good father that all of us wish we had had.
yeah.
And that was total acceptance. You know, you exist on Earth, so by definition, you're all good, you're all fine, you're all well, as you are, as you are. That was his message.
To share one thing I heard, one thing I read. So particularly for Val and Judith, but Jane and everyone, the thing I read that I loved was a mother talking about her youngest child was finally going to college after having been delayed from COVID and lockdowns. And she's sort of sitting in the empty room crying. And her husband came by and said, you know, they don't come from us, they come through us.
Right.
And being the grown child of aging parents and also of pubescent teens, I feel that intensely, and just remind myself that, right, they're on their own journey. The other thing was a talk I had re-listened to from Joseph Goldstein this weekend, where he says, and this is familiar to everyone because it's what John says when we meditate, only 6 things ever happened: sound, sight, smells, taste, touch, and mental events.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We just pack them up to create that meaning. I mean, and I do that all the time, but it's helpful for me just to think about it that way. It's just something arising in consciousness that I'm latching on to.
Nice.
And I guess just one more, especially for Meg and everyone. And I do this with my kids a lot. And Judith, I thought about this. I've been to that blaze too many times. I think about finding the one commonality. Like, I know COVID scares me, and I think it scares you. And what I want you to know is I love you. Like, that's right. If there's only one thing we'll get together on, maybe that will be the thing.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Thanks. Yeah.
I have to say this to Jenny because that quote is from Will Durant in his books on parenting. And it was actually when I had my first daughter on our birth announcement cards, I had that quote. So I find it, really speaks to me.
Well, if there isn't anything else, perhaps we can end.
Yeah.
Is there anything else anyone wants to share before we close?
Just thank you, Jeff, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Great discussion. Terrific.
And we have another discussion tomorrow night, so please feel free to let this percolate and see what comes up tomorrow too.
Yeah.
All right, I will put up the closing chants then. So we'll close with a prayer for peace, and then by dedicating the merit generated through our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the radiant wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.